Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of A Happy Moment. My name is Dan. Glad to have you with me today. And today I do have a very special guest with me. He is fantasy author Richie Billing. He released his first novel, Pariah's Lament, back in 2021. He's published several short stories, and on March 22nd of this year, he has a new novella coming out called Together We Rise. Richie, welcome to the show.
Hi Dan, thank you very much for having me.
Hey, thanks for coming on. I'm glad to have you here today. Uh, Richie, would you like to start off by sharing with us how you first got interested in becoming a writer?
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, it's never something I actually wanted to do. And growing up, I never thought, oh, I want to be a writer. But I loved reading books and just escaping into different worlds. So when I was sort of around like 11, 12, the Lord of the Rings movies came out. And I just remember watching them and just being completely like enraptured by this rich world and the stories unfolding. And I suppose that sort of really hooked me. And then we had the sort of Harry Potter craze when I was like sort of a little bit older. So I've been assaulted by fantasy books all throughout my life, and I just love them. And I lost touch with reading completely when I went to university. I ended up becoming a lawyer, started doing that job, and just really like didn't like it. It just was not something that I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing. So at the time, I was reading fantasy again, and I was loving it so much that it started to like sort of inspire me, or at least sort of kickstart the thought and idea of, well, like this could be something that you'd like to do. And I always liked writing, so I just started, and I loved it. I fell in love, and then I've done it ever since. It's been about 10 years now, and I've learned a lot along the way, made a lot of mistakes. But yeah, I've got a couple of books out now. For Eyes Lament, like you mentioned, that came out in 2021. Together We Rise. I'm so excited for this book because Pariah's Lament was part of a shared universe, and it wasn't my universe, so I was writing with a bunch of other authors. It's a really cool concept. So everyone writes within a sort of framework, and you've got to try and link your stories in with everybody else's. So that was quite good, but it wasn't mine. If you get me, so this book that's coming out now is it's all mine.
That's very cool. How long did it take you to write Pariah's Lament?
Prize Man took me a while. That took me like probably 2.5 years. I had to probably like a year drafting and then 18 months editing. And bear in mind this has been done part time. Like I'm not a full time author. I have to work 9 to 5, like many writers, sadly. And like I say, I used to be a lawyer, but I did quit that job. And I decided like, oh, if I'm gonna do writing, I try and give it a go. I'm gonna have to devote more time to it. So that's why I decided to quit my job. I ended up running an Irish pub for a while, which was quite fun, good for inspiration. And then now I work in digital marketing, um, doing a bit more of an adult job, 9 to 5, which is it's I enjoy what I do, but it's not what I really want to do.
Did working at the pub give you a lot of inspiration for different characters?
Oh yeah, I used to love it for that. To be honest, like I'd be sitting in the office and you just hear people. They've been drinking Guinness all day. This is about like 7 o'clock on Sunday usually, and there'd just be like a few really drunk people left. You just have like one fella just singing the odd line of a song every now and then just people debating and like talking absolute waffle to each other. And you get some a lot of good ideas. You get a lot of funny lines. Get good ideas for songs and just characters as well. I mean, I love people watching and I love observing people's like behaviour and like how they interact with other people. And that is probably one of the best sources of ideas because there's so many people around you all the time and people from all different parts of the world as well. It's just quite cool.
Ever have any bar fights?
Yeah, we did have pretty crazy bar fights. the police came to split it up, and then the people who were fighting ended up throwing like glasses at the police. I think the police ended up getting off as well.
Ooh, sounds like a wild time.
Yeah, I
uh,
know. I don't miss that job, so.
yeah. Well, Richie, let's talk about Together We Rise. So Together We Rise, it's a novella. It has to do with a revolution against a corrupt government. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about it?
Of course, yeah. So probably for like I don't know how you feel about the state of the world, Dan, but I've been feeling a bit like frustrated, a bit angry, seeing what's going on. Also, particularly helpless. I feel like there's not much I can do to change the course of the world. But being a writer, one of the best escapes you can have is to write a story. And what I wanted to do was sort of provide an outlet for the frustration that I was feeling, while sort of critiquing the worst sides of capitalist societies. To be honest, like there are aspects of capitalism that I do like. Like I like the entrepreneurial nature of it and how it can give people opportunities. But I think what we're seeing now with the way like Trump's taking America, this is just like unchecked uh, destructive capitalism and very exploitative, and all at the there's a massive human cost to it essentially. And this is what I wanted to do in this story, was to show the human consequences of a destructive and exploitative society. And kind of like The Wire, if you've ever seen that TV show. But I absolutely love The Wire because it critiques the war on drugs and shows the different perspectives and how it's basically destroyed society on so many different levels. And that's what I wanted to do. So I've got like lots of different perspectives. I've got like the healer, who's trying to like patch everyone back together after like suffering these terrible like accidents at work and stuff. And I have a trade union, like the equivalent of a trade union person in a fantasy world, and he's charged with sparking the initial uprising amongst the workers to lead the revolution. And the story just follows what happens over the course of the day, and it's like a relay race. So, like we've got the healer it starts with, and then it takes you to the worker, and then the worker takes it to another character, um, who happens to be a drug pusher. And this is the economic perspective because I personally feel that like you create these like a society like this creates these monstrous people who just exploit other people, and it creates like a really terrible cycle of like I don't know. It's almost like modern day slavery, isn't it? Like people become trapped and they can't escape, and um, yeah, so it's quite interesting to look at his perspective and how he sort of breaks down the economics of this sort of corrupt capitalist system. And then interesting perspectives like someone within the police force who's been charged to go out and stop these protesters. And he's probably one of my favourite characters. He's called Kishto. There's 8 characters altogether, and it's like they're like little short stories, and it's all about how each character has to confront their own change that they need to make in their own life, and the role that they play in the overarching story of the revolution.
Okay, I mean, there's certainly no shortage of real world inspiration that you have on a topic like this.
Oh no.
um, so is this a one shot or are you turning into a series?
So this is set in my ever expanding fantasy world, which is called Tavia, and I've written some short stories before, and a couple of the characters from those short stories are in this novella. So what I try and do is I try and like just weave different strands together. So there's like a character from the novella who's also in a novel that I've written and currently editing. I hate editing novels; it's so long. But yeah, so and then I just write little short stories here and there. So I've recently finished like a sort of a funnier short story. But I try to be funny. It's subjective, let's be honest. But it's more humorous, and it's about these two foolish cousins trying to rob goblins. It goes all horribly wrong, and then I've written another sort of short story, which is structured like a to-do list, like from the perspective of the goblin chieftain. And then within that sort of to-do list, because it's broken down over the course of a week, so Monday's to-do list, Tuesday's to-do list, and then about on Wednesday, you you get reference to the foolish cousins. So I try and like weave things together like that. So while it's a standalone story, um, there'll be other little nuggets there for you to find.
Okay. Now, uh, what would you like to accomplish with Together We Rise? Are you looking to kind of like inspire hope?
Yeah, it's exactly it. It's just I don't know how you feel about the state of the world, but I do feel a bit hopeless. And this is like a bit of a fun escape. Like it's it's like a quite like I put a bit in the end of the book about this is the story about the what if. What if we all decided that like we've had enough. Stop fucking ruining the world. So let's just rise up and take back our futures. And this is just a story, a very quick, fun, action-packed, hopefully thought-provoking story um, about that simple thing. That, and by the end of it, it might give you a bit of a hope and hopefully a fun escape.
Yeah. Uh, uh, Probably it's gonna be a tough question, but do you have like any favorite characters in the book? Maybe you'd like to share a little bit more about them.
Yeah, I suppose the reason why I decided to write this story was for one character. So I mentioned a novel that I was working on, which was related to this story, and to help me write that novel, I took the best part of like another novel I'd written years ago, and it wasn't very good, but I loved the concept, so I took a big chunk of that, used it for the novel, and it left my favourite storyline, and it wasn't enough to like make a novel with or anything like that, and I couldn't fit it into the other story I was working on, and I was like, oh, I can't just leave this character because she's one of the first characters I ever created, and she's based in the city where this revolution and uprising happens. The city's called Pietalos, and the character's called Tilia. So she's the daughter of a blacksmith. Uh, that blacksmith happened to serve in the army, he's really good at swords, and he sort of taught Tilia as well. So she's pretty handy with a blade. Um, but she just lives a simple life, and she ends up getting courted by this sort of police chief who comes across all charming and stuff like that, and she gets swooned and ends up sort of marrying him. But when they get married, then that's when he turns and like his true nature is revealed, and he just sort of like abuses her, like destroys her, like a life essentially, and she ends up finding out that he's behind the murder of her father as well. He just absolutely like destroys every aspect of her life just to control her, and she just hits like absolute rock bottom. And one night she's just sort of like debating what to do next with her life, and she comes across this woman being assaulted by a police officer and ends up intervening and killing this police officer. And the act of killing him, like she just feels so powerful and that like she's got control again. And then she goes off and like she pursues this feeling and becomes a bit of a vigilante and like starts taking out like corrupt police officers, drug dealers and stuff like that. And she develops this reputation, like this alter ego, as people call a shadow. Like no one knows if it's a man or a woman. It's just a character named Shadow, and but she realizes like after a little while of doing this, that it's just not enough. That like it's just they have to completely change things if anything's to get better. Um, so that's when she starts organising the revolution. And the way I've done this is I've tried to explain what I've just told you there whilst the revolution's taking place. So it's like I don't info dump or anything like that. I just reveal bits of information, like the motivations behind why we're all here. Because to be honest, there's a lot of fluff in novels, and I feel like if you could do it well, you can reveal everything the reader needs to know whilst progressing the story forward. So I was like, all right, let's just do. It starts in the morning and it ends on the evening of Revolution Day, and Talia's the sort of the main thread that goes through the story. So you see her in the first chapter, and then she has her own chapter at the end, but you see her throughout. But I did this by accident. Most of the time, she's referred to as Shadow, or Shadow's introduced, and we see Tilia separately. And then someone read it recently and said, "Oh, I love that reveal with Shadow and Tilia." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't even realize that I'd done that reveal." But she's like there throughout, and she's definitely my favorite character. But I mentioned another character called Kishto, who's a guard, and he's a corrupt guard. He's been a horrible bastard in his like working life, but he wanted to when he first joined the guards. He had good intentions, and he was a decent person. He just corrupted, but he kind of sees the light and decides to help the people like gain access to the next gate so they can get to the final keep to overthrow the leaders. And Kishto changes sides and helps. And yeah, I quite like that little redeeming moment for Kishto.
Okay, very cool. Richie, I'd like to talk about something unique that you're doing with this. You've given all of the main characters their own soundtrack. How did that come about?
Yeah, so I suppose this all comes back to like when you first fall in love with fantasy. Like, and for me, it was probably like the Lord of the Rings movies, and the big part of the movies was the music and the soundtrack. Are you a Lord of the Rings fan yourself, Dan?
Um, I've I've watched the movies, but I have not read the books.
Yeah,
The I had a hard time getting into the books, but I enjoy the movies.
yeah. And what do you think of the soundtrack?
And as you alluded to, I mean, fantasy usually has some pretty epic soundtracks.
Yeah, it just like inspires me so much and like moves me and motivates me. And I when I write, I do tend to listen to music because it helps me feel the emotions of the characters or helps me like, like find a place in the scene. Um, and what I decided to do because of like technology nowadays, like I found a tool that you could like basically engineer your own music, and it was amazing, like the results. And I was like, I wonder if you could actually do a soundtrack and do a song for each character. And then gradually I started doing this over the course of a few months and creating different sounds. And yeah, I've ended up basically for each character at the start of each chapter. There's a QR code, and you can scan the QR code, and it'll take you to the song. And each character has their own song, and it mirrors the emotional journey that they go through in the story. So, for example, one of my favorite songs is I've called "Break the Shackles," and it's for the working class part of the story where the workers rise up and revolt against the employers. And um, I wanted it to be like sad because they are essentially what is happening here is they're going to war, and these are just honest, hard-working people. They don't want to fight, but they have to, and they're willing to put their lives on the line to basically get their futures back. So it's like sad. I've put like a lot of violins in there, and then as they begin to sort of rise up, you get the heavy drums that match the sort of marching, and even like curious little sounds because this is like an ironworks. So there was like, it was almost like a sound where it was like someone bashing a pot or a pan in time with the beat, and it was like amazing really because you could imagine someone there like bashing a pot or a pan in like to get like a bit of a beat going. So that was quite cool, and then it ends in quite like a dramatic way, but it brings them sad violins back in because obviously like some of them are going to die. They are marching to war, and war's never good. So I always like to just bring it back to the fact that like, yeah, like no one wants to fight. We're forced into this position, and we know that people are going to die. But it's like if you're stuck in a corner, what choice do you have? So that's what I've kind of do. That's just one example, and all throughout there's like different characters of their own journeys. So the songs are quite different, and it's been a lot of fun introducing that side of it.
That's awesome. And for the listeners out there, after the interview is over, stay tuned because Richie sent me a clip of one of the soundtracks. I believe it was Fertilia, and I'll be playing that after the interview is over, so everyone can check it out. And Richie, that's a really cool idea how you're gonna have the QR codes in there in the book. Um, yeah, I never heard of anybody doing that before. That's a really neat idea.
Yeah, I suppose when you've got because I decided to publish this one myself, I was like, well, if I'm doing this, like I've got the freedom to enhance the experience, and the music, the soundtrack was one thing, and doing things like I love maps, and the map in this story, I thought it could definitely enhance this experience if we got like a really good map. So I ended up getting in touch with the guy who did the maps for Joe Abercrombie's First Law trilogy. He's called Jack Shepherd. I got him on board, and he did a full city map. And the way we did it was to have it like an official city map. Um, and the I've got different versions of this map. So I've got like the official version, and then I've got the revolutionaries version. So they've taken this and they've added notes to it, and it shows the plans and the routes that they take and what they've got to do to overcome the government. So you can, again, put little QR codes in. People can scan it, and then they can go and look at the full map on the phone or the computer and see what it's like in colour. You can zoom in on different things, and yeah, just try and make the experience a bit more immersive.
Now for the maps and the soundtracks, will people have access to that if they buy the book digitally?
Yeah. So I mean, ebooks it's even better because you just literally tap, it takes you there.
Okay.
Again, what I've tried to do because the ebook was tricky. I've put the QR codes in again, but I know. I mean, I like to read books on my Kindle, or well, Kindle app on my phone. So I was like, oh, I would just scan a QR code on your phone. So I was like, oh, I'll just put like a little button next to it so you can just tap and it'll take you to the song. So it's not
Okay, that's
that's not
very
too
cool.
bad. Yeah. And the soundtrack I'm going to put on Spotify as well as like an album, so people will be able to stream it as they listen.
Okay, awesome. Richie, let's talk a little bit about your website because you actually have quite a treasure trove of information on there. The website is www.richiebilling.com, and you have a lot of resources on there for fantasy writers. And I believe you also released a book on the craft of writing. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so when I first started writing fantasy, it was a good while ago now, and there wasn't much in terms of like support and content. Like I think there was a couple of books, but not a lot really. And I had to sort of go off and study. Um, I've probably got more books on writing than any other type of book. It just spans a few shelves on my bookshelf, on my bookcase. But yeah, it's studied it a lot, done a lot of courses, of different like sort of lengths, and obviously practiced a lot as well. And as I was going, I was making notes and learning things from all these really good writers and editors. And what I used to do was just turn those notes into blog posts, and then over time, I've accumulated quite a lot of content, and I put it in a book called the Fantasy Writer's Handbook, and it's basically a complete guide. Um, Firstly, it looks at the process of writing a fantasy story. Then it looks at what to do when the writing's finished, so getting published and stuff like that. And then there's a whole section dedicated to writing fantasy specifically, so that looks at like magic systems and world building and stuff like that. I do plan on doing a second edition, because it was about 6 years ago when that came out. And yeah, so that I'm hopefully going to try and do that this year or next year, just depends. But
Okay.
on my website, there's more like sort of up to date content, and I've got tools on there. I've got like a fantasy name generator. There's like a book description generator you can use to customize your book descriptions on Amazon and Goodreads. And there's like lists of publishers, list of book reviewers. Yeah, so just trying anything helpful, I just put on that website. So if you're looking for writing tips and stuff like that, it's a good place to go.
Yeah, and there's a lot of information on a variety of topics, and just as an example, I was checking it out, and I was reading about like uh, archery in fantasy novels, and like how like in a lot of times the movies we see like the archers, they have the quiver on their back and they reach back and pull an arrow. Uh,
Yeah,
the article the article that you wrote actually talks about how like uh, I guess the real way that they would do it was to like have the quiver on their hip for easier access. So
yeah,
I thought that was pretty neat. I learned something.
yeah. I mean, it is really interesting what you pick up. I mean, I'd never done any kind of archery, and I was at the time I was working with a friend who was a really really good archer, and he was like at like nearly at Olympic level. So he took me along to a class. And I picked up more things there that you wouldn't even never think of. So the way they wear the glove, and the glove comes up to the wrist, so about here, because when you let go of the string, it'll snap, and sometimes it'll cut your arm. So you need the leather to protect your arm there. And just going back to the quiver, like wearing it on your hip is the best place for it. But even still, you can make a mistake, because some people wear the quiver with the arrows pointing backwards. So sometimes like the arrows can fall out. So you want to have the quiver pointing, oh, with the arrows pointing forwards. Yeah, interesting.
I was trying to remember, did Legolas wear the glove?
I imagine so. He was always sort of. I think he did. He did always have leather on his. They called leather van braces. Is that what they're called?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Did he?
yeah.
I couldn't remember.
So
But
someone will have to research it.
but he wore the quiver on his back, I think, from the movie, if I remember.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I think you can wear it on your back. I don't think it's a
just gotta
big
be more
deal.
careful.
Yeah, I mean, you can get like there's called baldricks, aren't they? And that this is it's like a sheath for your sword that goes over your shoulder. There's a good guy I think on YouTube called Shadowversity, and he looks at all these things. He's like, "Oh, let's do an experiment to see if it actually works," and he'll try and make his own baldrick to see if it would be possible to do.
So Richie, knowing what you know now about archery, if you were going into a fight, what kind of bow would you bring?
Well, everyone says the longbow, because you can get like real power behind that. Like there's a really good story of the Battle of Crécy, where the French were pursuing the English, and the English were pretty outnumbered, but they had a pretty big contingent of longbowmen, and the the French came, and they all kitted out in armor, but because like the longbow can get so much power behind it, it can just go through steel at like certain distances, and he just butchers the French completely just with bowling.
Oof.
Uh, yeah, so
That's,
be careful with the longbow.
yeah. That'd be a nasty way to go out. Take a longbow through the chest, an arrow.
Oh yeah, I think crossbows are quite nasty as well because, I mean, they take ages to reload, but if you hit someone with one of them, like that bolt is going straight through the body. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Uh do you have any archers in your book?
In this story, no, because it's more of a fist to fist melee. Um,
Okay.
but in the first novel, Prize Lament, uh, one of the main characters, Izzy, she becomes she was like decent with a bow as a kid, and then because she was born with a birthmark on her face, and everyone thinks she's cursed and she's like ostracized, so she's not allowed to use a bow. But she ends up sort of joining up with an army later on in the story, and she gets taught by um, this group of female archers called the Darts of Pleasure, which I thought was quite good. Um, and they train her up, and she ends up fighting with them in the main or the final battle as an archer. So I used all the little bits that I'd learned for that story as well.
Okay, nice. Richie, you also have a podcast that you do, right?
Yeah, it's called Fantasy Writers Toolshed, and it is just a bit of an extension of a Fantasy Writers Handbook and the website. It's talking about all different writing tips and things like that, but I tend to get guests on. So I've been really lucky to interview quite a few like people I admire and look up to, and a few really interesting people as well. I think we got Adrian Tchaikovsky on, Stephen Arayan, Jennifer Armentrout, and probably one of the most interesting guests was a former FBI special agent called Joe Navarro, who's also like an international expert on body language. So it was quite good because obviously, like when you're writing, you can include body language in your dialogue, and it's really interesting. I think for readers because when we watch things, like we're always looking at characters and how they react, and the better actors have the more convincing body language, and then that makes us wonder, like, oh, I wonder what he's thinking, wonder what he's up to, and we can do that in our stories as well. And I think it's probably a little bit underdone. I suppose main reason could be behind that is because when we write stories, we can go into characters' minds, so we don't need to sort of suggest what they're thinking because we can tell the reader what they're thinking. But I still think it's more interesting as a reader to pick up on like body language and encourage us to engage with the story and think about it more.
Okay, very cool. And on that note, uh, when you're writing, like, how much, like for Together We Rise, how much research did you have to do going into that? Like, are you
Research
researching various
wise,
topics, like body
yeah,
language and stuff to put in there and that sort of thing?
it's not too bad now for researching that kind of thing for body language because um, I've been doing it a while, so hopefully I'm not too bad at that. But you do need to research certain things. For this story, it was quite nice because I was kind of relying on a lot of the things I know. So there's a scene where there's like like a fatal accident at work, and I used to be like an accident at work lawyer, so I draw a lot of the experiences there. Um, it really does depend, but it's quite interesting the research side. I don't know if you like crime fiction, but I'm a big fan of a writer called Ian Rankin, and I went to a talk with him recently. And I mean, these crime stories, like there's so many subplots, so many strands going on. You always think that like they must be so like organized and meticulous with the notes, and they just must know where everything's going. And I found it quite interesting to learn that he's a complete pantser and he just makes it up as he goes along and figures it out. So even if he was writing like a closed room murder, which is like one of the most crazy like like things to solve. He'll just like, all right, that's the ending. Now I'm gonna try and solve the case from the beginning. And even when he's doing his drafts, he won't do like research. He'll just say he might make notes and say I need to do more research on this. So when he goes back and edits, then he'll do his research. So it's a really economical way of writing a story. You don't like need to go and do loads before you feel confident enough to begin. You can just sort of wing it, work out what you need, and then go back and iron things out.
Okay, very cool. Um, Richie, were there any particular authors that you looked up to that you for inspiration? I mean, we talked about Lord of the Rings. Anyone others other than Tolkien that you might have looked to for inspiration?
Yeah, I do really love George R. R. Martin. I've read all the Game of Thrones books, and some of the best writing I've ever read. Um, so that inspired me a lot. And Raymond Feist, I don't know if you've ever read any of the Rift War books. Um,
I've not.
they, there's quite a lot of them, about 20. And that story, like the timeline spans like over, I think it's over 1,000 years. But it's really good and it's sort of immersive fantasy. But for this, Together We Rise, particular influence was Daniel Polanski, who's a writer from Baltimore. I actually interviewed him on my podcast before I'd read any of his stuff. And when we got talking, he was telling me about like his influences, and one of them was The Wire. Funny enough, a big influence for me as well. And The Wire set in Baltimore, so particularly relevant for him. Uh, and he's from a similar sort of background to me, like working class, and uh, he wrote about a lot of them things in his first series of books, which was called Lowtown, and it was about a police officer who was kicked out the force and then became a drug dealer, and it's in this really like corrupt city, very sort of similar to Together We Rise, and that's like rampant capitalism. Everyone's exploited, and people are just left to sort of fight and survive. And yeah, it's really, really like interesting the way he did it. And I suppose it was nice for me to see like a working class perspective on like a fantasy story, and I love that grittiness, the realness of it all. And yeah, that's what really sort of I was like, yeah, this is what the kind of approach I want to take with my next project, and he was a big influence for me on this one.
Okay, cool. Now, Richie, we're gonna start wrapping things up here shortly, and as I mentioned earlier, I'm gonna um, play one of the soundtracks that you sent over. It's for the character Tilia. Would you like to talk about this particular soundtrack and what kind of feelings you're trying to convey with it?
Yeah, so this was one of the first ones that I actually made, and it kind of showed me what you can do with these kind of tools. And um, Tilia is at this point in the story, um, they're at the last push to overcome the leaders. They just need to sort of take one more gate. So it's like all ramping up. Everyone's flooding forward. Um, and there's a big sort of blockade that they've got to overcome. But at this stage, Tilly's also got her own sort of score to settle. So one of her sort of things that she needs to overcome is she basically wants to kill her abusive husband. So she wants to track him down. Because he's a police chief, he's like quite high up in like the sort of corrupt policing of it all, and the sort of police are defending the government in this situation. So she's trying to hunt him down, and there's obviously the song follows that, and she does eventually find and gets revenge. It's quite satisfying. But
Okay.
yeah, it's definitely my favourite song. It's very dramatic, a lot of big drums, a lot of there's a really nice sort of dynamic in it with a few violins. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it.
Okay, very cool. And again, the book is Together We Rise, coming out March 22nd. Would you like to leave us with any final thoughts on Together We Rise?
Yeah, so basically, if you're looking for a story about fighting injustice and fighting against unfairness and battling for like a better world, and you're looking for something a bit hopeful, then this would be a fun escape. So it comes out on the 22nd of March. You can get it everywhere, um, in paperback and ebook. And yeah, I sincerely hope you enjoy it. If you do, manage to check it out.
Okay, very cool. And again, the website is www.richiebilling.com. Richie, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Dan, thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Do you have any social media handles you'd like to throw out there?
Yeah, on Instagram mainly. I'm not a social media kind of person. I really don't like them, but I do. I'm on Instagram. You can just search Richie Billing, and there's not many Richie Billings in the world, so I'm not the Hearts fan.
Okay, awesome. And thank you again, and thanks to everyone for who tunes into this. If you'd like to learn more about my podcast, you can find me on Instagram, Blue Sky, YouTube, Facebook. Just search for a Happy Moment Podcast, and I will see you guys next time. Take care, everybody.